whole story is beyond horrific, but what is really chilling is the way you described how they commercialized this slavery, that it's a marketplace.
I think we can all agree that what we are dealing with here is a terribly barbarous, completely unacceptable group.
We have to stand up. We have to stand up. And this is against humanitarian rights in any way. These girls are driven to kill themselves.
From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, the Zoomer with Conrad Black and Libby Znaimer.
Hello and welcome to the Zoomer. Today we're focusing on the plight of persecuted minorities in the Muslim Middle East, especially in Iraq and Syria. We've all seen the barbaric evidence of mass killings and beheadings by ISIS, the so-called Islamic State. Is this the beginning of the end for non-Muslims in that part of the world, Conrad?
I don't think so. The largest group, I believe, are the Copts in Egypt, and with the overthrow of the Muslim Brotherhood, their position is less threatened. The second largest are the Christians in Lebanon, and their position, well, obviously always contested, is still quite solid. I think that the main opposition to any kind of pluralism are relatively unrepresentative factions, ISIS and some of the other extreme elements in Syria. And it's a terribly violent situation, and awful things happen, and some of the people here know a great deal about that. But I don't believe that it needs sweep all the non-Muslims out of the area, apart from Israel. I don't think that'll happen.
Okay, well, we hope you're right. And there is a lot to discuss with our panel. Joining us today are the Canada-based representatives of the affected ethnic and religious groups, as well as humanitarian aid workers. Also, we've received exclusive footage filmed in northern Iraq during humanitarian missions undertaken by our friend and frequent guest on the Zoomer, the Reverend Majid al-Shafi, with his organization, One Free World International. Let's roll the first piece of tape.
Part of what we're doing here is that we're bringing medication to the people. We're trying to bring healing to the nation itself, but also to stand strong in the midst of the storm when it comes to the persecutions of the Christians and the Yazidi and other minorities. Basically, when we went to Kurdistan, Iraq, our main mission was to go to the front line and to be able to rescue some of the minority families that been stuck under ISIS. So we went up to 200 meters away from ISIS. That's how close we were. You can see the flags, ISIS flags, and we was able, directly or indirectly, we was able to rescue Christian family from Sinjar Mountain. They was under ISIS for the last 3 months, under the rule of ISIS. And at the same time, we was able to rescue some of the Yazidi girls.
Every time I said to myself that I will forget this story, but I can't. It's a nightmare living with me.
In this meat market where they will sell them, they will separate them from each other, and some of these girls was raped up to 20 times a day. They was dividing them. So they would tell them, I'm taking your mom to give them food. Of course, there was no food. Basically, they was just telling them this is excuses so they can separate them from each other. And every section, wherever they went, that's where the mother was raped in front of their daughter. Maybe they didn't see them in a close range, but they can hear the voices from far away.
And the other set of sisters that we interviewed, the one sister said something similar, separating the older women and the younger children, and they set them on fire.
A lot of them, after they get sold, some of them will be shipped to Syria, and this is the problem. We can rescue them. We have a way or two through the tribes to rescue them as long as they are in Iraq. Once they are in Syria, it's next to the impossible to rescue any of them.
The whole story is beyond horrific, but what is really chilling is the way you described how they commercialized this slavery, that it's a marketplace, and that means there are sellers and there are buyers,
Yes.
and all of this is done under the flag of the Islamic State and is permissible.
This is not the first time that this has happened. The different that now we have mobiles, we have cameras, we have YouTube, we have Google, we have all the technology that we can see, and now the story is easier to know the story more now. But this has been happening for years and years and years, even in the old days, where Christians, Jews, other minorities will be taken as slaves and will be used in these manners. Sex slaves, they will take the kids, will use them as a fighter, so the kid will grow up, doesn't know who's his mom, his dad, will be a child, and will grow up, they will teach them to be a fighter, and he become a soldier as part of the Islamic State.
Well, obviously some very, very disturbing footage. Dalal, as a Yazidi woman, what goes through your mind when you see that?
I'm horrified. I'm speechless. How can this happen to little girls as low as 9 years old? How can this happen to innocent little girls, to little innocent Yazidi and Assyrian girls? And how can we just stand there and let this happen? How can they be sold and raped 20 times? I can't even imagine the pain.
And what are you trying to do here from Canada?
Trying to be a voice for those little girls, trying to reach out to people to do something about this. This is not right. These little girls are paying the price.
But Dalal, at this point, isn't it essentially a military question? Don't we have to, all civilized peoples, defeat the forces that are responsible for these crimes?
We humans are responsible for these crimes. We humans create these problems, and humans need to fix this. It's nobody's problems but us.
And we have on Skype from Ottawa, Brad Butt, MP, and he has traveled with One Free World International. Brad, you've watched the footage, you've been there. What do you think we should be doing?
Well, Canada is playing, I think, an important dual role. One is obviously through the work of our brave men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces who are working with the Peshmerga troops and working with both the Kurdistan regional government and the Iraqi national government to make sure that we have a military presence there. Obviously, Parliament has just approved an extension of that, and also airstrikes now into Syria as well. So there is an important military role, but the other role that's equally as important, which we are a true leader on, is the humanitarian assistance side. And when I did go and travel to the Kurdistan region, you can certainly see the presence of Canadian humanitarian assistance, whether it be through the World Food Program or whether it be through our efforts with other NGOs to ensure that Canada is providing its financial humanitarian assistance to the region as well. So we have those two very important roles, in my view.
But Mazir, what is the current condition of the Yazidis? Are they scattered? I mean,
the current condition.
I know it's been terrible, but
it cannot be worse. It cannot be
well,
worse.
except most of them are still alive.
Presently about 430,000 are displaced in northern Iraq.
Yes.
They live in tent.
But are they in camp?
Bad condition. They are in camp. Yeah, the tent camp during the winter. Many people, like the world, like Canada, we are very thankful to Canada. They send many humanitarian aid. The Hindu community and the Jewish community were very supportive. They did send aid directly to the people. And it's not enough.
We're going to have a lot more on that, but right now we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
There was a family living here, and you can see they used to have a normal life, and there was kids with the school books, and all was destroyed.
Welcome back to theZoomer. Now we're going to take you back to Iraq with One Free World International. Here we are going to learn how ISIS makes and takes money to support the Islamic State, and that includes the buying and selling of sex slaves.
Look at this. Look at this. So who is doing this business? Where does this money go?
All of this money will go to the Islamic State Beit al-Mal, the house of money.
So it's not gangsters or freelancers. This is a policy revenue generator.
Absolutely.
For the caliphate.
Absolutely. The caliphate will have some sources. One of them will be the oil field that they will control. Sex slavery will be part of it. Drugs, weapons, kidnapping. So kidnapping and trading, like they can kidnap somebody from the West, or ransoms and so on. All of this will be considered revenue that all of them will end in Beit al-Mal. And then they will pay salary to the fighters, they will buy new weapons, and they will continue the fight. So it's a revenue to the Islamic State.
So it's systematized,
Absolutely.
It's administered, it's
Absolutely.
horrific.
There was a family living here, and you can see they used to have a normal life, and there was kids with the school books, and all was destroyed.
Something that I've seen in talking with people about my trip and talking with people about some of the things that we witnessed, and I've had some people say, well, little girls are raped over here. There's all kinds of atrocities like this that are performed in North America. And my answer to them is, yeah, sure, in North America, in the West, and all over the world, there are sick people. But usually a sick person that abuses children or does things like this, they're usually acting alone. In rare cases, they might be part of 2 or 3. And in really rare cases, you get the Jonestowns, you get the Waco, David Koresh things where they're a larger group and they perform these crazy, sick, demented things. But what we're seeing over here with ISIS and with radical Islam, you've got tens of thousands of people, if not more, that have this same sickness, this same dimension, and they're working together as a unit to accomplish one goal. And that is a big difference in what we have with our minority of twisted people over here.
One Free World International has rescued between 300 and 400 Yazidis, but it seems to be very dangerous and a very slow process of negotiation, one girl at a time. Brad, you accompanied Reverend El Shafi. I'm also curious, as a representative of the government, can you participate in basically ransoming these slaves? And how does the government view that?
No, I cannot. And when I accompanied Reverend El Shafi to the region, I went as an individual member of Parliament. I was not representing the government of Canada at that particular time. I went because, as one individual member of Parliament, I'm gravely concerned by what is happening in that region of the world and the terrible atrocities that are taking place. And I felt, as one Canadian parliamentarian, that I thought it would be helpful for me to be on the ground, to physically see what was going on, the support that is being provided in this, and our continuous fight against the so-called ISIL movement, and report back to my colleagues here on Parliament Hill. And that was the reason why I went on the trip in early March with One Free World.
Okay, David, your organization helps oppressed people around the world, but what are some of the common obstacles, and how do you deal with something like the need to actually ransom people?
Yeah, URDO is the humanitarian agency of the Pentecostal Assemblies, but also supported by Canadians from coast to coast. So we have a long history of seeking to respond to the most vulnerable and the most oppressed. Access is the biggest obstacle that we face on an ongoing basis. How do we get the most help to the most people in some very desperate situations? That's what our goal is. One of the obstacles, frankly, is purely logistics, and making sure that we can actually get the right help. Sometimes that means that you have to deal with and talk to people that have different views than yours, actually people of evil, to get access to really the most marginalized and the most vulnerable.
But David, these people in desperate conditions are scattered about and they're being harried from place to place by some of the forces that are interacting there. How do you distribute what you assemble for their benefit? How do you get it to them? I mean, you need some transport network, so you have to rely on the military resources of the West, don't you, to get it to them?
Absolutely.
But they have been cooperating, I see.
They have with us. We actually work, because we're not a large agency, we're actually at a kind of a grassroots level with other partners, other church houses across Canada. We're able to often move into informal camps, even unregistered camps, not the UNHCR or the UN camps where there are hundreds of thousands of people. Sometimes we're coming alongside camps of 200 families that are here today, this week, and may not be there next week. So, but they're in need this week.
Well, it's a survival game until we settle the military question. I hate to sound like a one-note person here, but that's essentially
right.
Okay, well, we will try to get to those long-term solutions in a bit. Right now, we're going to take a short break. Back in a moment.
We think of war, we think of overseas, away from our homes. When these guys think of war, it's in their backyard.
Welcome back. The Peshmerga are the Kurdish armed forces, and next, One Free World International takes us to the front lines to witness firsthand how this poorly equipped army will fight to the death to protect the land and the people of the Kurdistan region that lies within Iraq. We know that as of February 2015, around 1,050 Peshmerga soldiers have been killed and dozens have been captured. Take a look.
This is the front line. You can see that they have they dig basically because ISIS keeps sending cars with bombs, car bombs. So they have to dig it. So in order, if the car came, will fill in the hole, so it will not kill as many people.
terrible tragedy, but let it not obscure, frankly, the respect I think we should have for the Kurdish fighter.
We read such divergent things about the Peshmerga. In some reports, they're characterized as a highly efficient, highly motivated, highly principled armed force for the Kurdish people. And other times, they are portrayed as ragtag and badly equipped, and
they are very badly
ill-disciplined.
They are good fighters because they've been fighting all their lives. The only problem is that they are very badly not equipped. Definitely, they don't have heavy arm to defeat ISIS. But also another problem that they have, they don't have proper coordinating between themselves because they are Valentino army. They are militias.
I don't care if you're Yazidi or Christian or Muslim. We're all the same. We're all Kurds.
And you're a soldier of all Kurdistan.
Exactly.
This guy is the commander of one of the front lines, the 200 meter. 2 months before, he got hit with a rock. He almost lost half of his head. He lost all his security. 2 months he was healed, he returned back again to the front line. And now he is explaining on the map where is ISIS and where they are and how's the battle is going.
These guys, they look more
seasoned.
Yeah.
We actually saw
they
two
look
Americans.
Like real fighters. I would have said that looks like an American. The way he's dressed. And
We saw two Americans joining the one camp when we were there. They just walked up and were volunteering.
Oh, you mean just individuals?
Yeah.
This is the other side of all the international people flooding to ISIS.
Yeah.
So are they constantly exchanging bombardment, or what goes on? Is it a fairly stable line, as it were? It's been there for a while?
It was fairly quiet the day that we were there, but I guess they have attacks mostly at night, and which is one of the reasons. Like where we were, the Canadian soldier was killed the very next night.
Same spot.
That's where the Canadian soldier was killed. So basically this village, which is called Nahya Center, and if you focused on the mountain, you can see two ISIS flags.
There are cell phone towers, and this guy's got a pretty fancy smartphone.
I think a lot of these guys go home at the end of the day. They live fairly close, and we saw guys coming in. So there was cell signal. This is warfare in a modern place.
It's bizarre, isn't it? The terrain looks beyond primitive, and yet everybody's got the latest tech.
We think of war. We think of overseas, away from our homes. When these guys think of war, it's in their backyard.
Well, as we just saw, the Kurdish Peshmerga army is fighting ISIS in Iraq with financial backing and strategic advice from the allied forces, including Canada. 69 Canadian troops are training Peshmerga forces, but the recent death of one Canadian soldier, Sergeant Andrew Doiron, has placed the mission under scrutiny. Now, first of all, Sartip, how many Peshmerga are there, and are there actually enough of them to take on ISIS?
The Peshmergas are actually in Kurdistan of Iraq. They are around 50,000. It's two different main forces. They call it the PUK and the Democrats. But today, I guess this war was the symbol of unity, because not only the Peshmerga from Kurdistan of Iraq was in this war defeating ISIS, was also Yepaga and Peyda, which is from Kurdistan of Syria, or from Iran, or from Turkey. They were united at this moment to defeat the terrorism. But the thing is here, right, it's Canada, right, it's helping, and it's part of the ally, but it's still not enough. Like Kurdistan, the KRG, when it's Kurdistan Regional Government, it's in a war and also in a humanitarian crisis. More than 2 million people that in a refugee camp in Kurdistan region.
I'm sorry, I just want to make a point. I personally feel extremely strongly that we in the West owe a great deal to the Kurds. We made certain promises at the time of the Gulf War in the early 90s, and we effectively, all of us, including Canada, abandoned you to the mercies of Saddam Hussein. And what happened was it was a terrible disgrace to us as well as a tragedy for you. And now that the Kurds have persevered as they have, and as you say, they did defeat ISIS, Peshmerga has approximately as many warriors as ISIS. I want to sound a note of optimism. I mean, Ian, you can tell us that the progress the training forces are making, but they're clearly highly motivated fighters, and where the numbers and the equipment and the motivation are comparable, the side with the air support wins. And ISIS has no air force, and they can't move around very easily with the U.S. Air Force overhead. I just wanted to make those points.
No, you're right, absolutely.
I just wanted to ask Medlum, who is a Christian and obviously affected by this, just what your perspective on all of this is, and on the Peshmerga as well.
You know, it's. I think it's an unbalancing war, because you know the ISIL, they have very advanced weapons, but Peshmerga they don't have it. So that's why we are asking Canadian government and coalition forces, to help Peshmerga, because Peshmerga they are fighting around 1,050 kilometers from Sinjar border to Diyala border, from Syria border to Iran border.
Okay, then let's ask Ian then. So what are you hearing from inside the ranks? Is there an appetite for more involvement?
Well, I think right now the focus of the soldiers on the ground. So we have Operation Impact, which is putting the air cover in, cutting off supply lines, eliminating the convoys, also having an economic impact on ISIS's ability to continue the battle. But from the soldiers' perspective, going to educate and help. We're working with the Peshmerga, who are professional soldiers to a certain degree. They are battle-hardened. They've been fighting for a long time. The Canadian expertise, and then what we're providing for them, is tactical strengths, intelligence gathering, how to attack and force correctly, minimizing use of that ammunition, and using more experienced soldiers that can pass on the tactical ability to beat ISIS on the ground.
Ian, on Mr. Morogi's point, is there still a gap in the ordnance and the sophisticated military technology both sides have?
There is a gap, but we're eliminating it.
It's narrowing, isn't it?
It is, because we're bombing that.
But there's also a clear mandate to the Western powers within each country of all the major participants to assist Peshmerga to get to a state of equality of sophistication, is there not?
Yes, there is, and Canada has done that. Canada has sent arms and ammunition to assist them so that they can step up the game, if you will, to take the battle to the enemy. Right?
I think we have to discuss what more Canada could or should be doing, but first we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll also hear from our studio audience. Welcome back to theZoomer. We're talking about persecuted minorities in the Middle East, and now it's time to take some questions from our studio audience. Hi there, what's your name?
My name is Doğan, and I am, by training, I'm an economist, but currently I serve as one of the executive directors of the Kurdish Community Center in Toronto.
And what is your question?
Why they don't help Kurds in greater detail, because Kurds are the only means on the ground today that will encounter these people and to save and defend the innocent peoples of the region.
I mean, in fairness to the Americans, you can criticize what they did, but they spent $2 trillion and they committed extensive forces for a long period of time in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they don't particularly want to, and clearly do not want to, go back to that kind of thing and feel it's time to hand over to locals. And in theory, they're right. And Ian, you can verify, they did everything one could reasonably do to endow Iraq with the capacity to maintain its internal security, and yet it collapsed quite quickly. And they don't want to take it all onto themselves again. Israel is protecting Israel. It has no mandate to meddle in the neighboring countries, and it doesn't want to. Turkey should be playing more of a leadership role, but they're playing footsie with the Arabs, and they're suppressing the Kurds more thoroughly than anybody else. Yep. And the Iranians, traditionally, the Persians are a great power in the area, but they're now in the hands of completely irresponsible theocrats. So we're waiting for local political leadership to act responsibly. And we're trying to reinforce, and I'm taking upon myself to speak for the whole West here, and Ian, you can do it with more authority, but we're trying to support compatible forces and victims, and there are plenty of victims in that part of the world, as best we can.
My name is Roswitha Buskamp. I'm an artist, and I like to be the devil's advocate. My first question is this really Canada's problem? The second question is it a religious problem, and is it a new problem?
Yes, this is the international community's problem. To not be involved in this would be in itself a crime to some degree. We need to be there, standing up for Canadian values, which is to protect religious minorities, our other Canadian values of peace and the right to life. I mean, these are all fundamental Canadian values that we have to be involved in protecting other people throughout the world.
We're going to take a final question. What's your name?
My name is Hadi, last name Alice. I'm a sociologist and independent researcher.
Okay, what's your question?
Why the West not exposing Turkey's involvement in global jihadi terrorism?
Okay.
I think it is. I think the Western disaffection with Turkey is extremely well known. And Turkey's status as a member of NATO, I think, is a subject of considerable discussion about whether it can continue. Look, the manner in which they're tolerating such oil as ISIS can collect to be exported through Turkey is an absolute disgrace. That Turkey, a member of NATO, has anything to do and gives any comfort to ISIS is just grounds for expelling them from NATO.
I agree.
But that is a radical step.
Yeah.
But it is not the case that no one notices what Turkey's up to.
Okay, well, while we're talking about taking that radical step, Conrad, politicians here have hotly debated Canada's role in the ISIS conflict, especially concerning our Air Force's participation in airstrikes. But there are also issues of humanitarian aid. How much do we give? How many arms do we supply? We've just been talking about all that. And can we support refugees from the region when the Yazidi and Kurdish communities here are so small? I'm going to throw the question of Canada's ongoing involvement to the table, but first, here's something that Liberal leader Justin Trudeau said to Conrad on the matter in a recent conversation.
What is your current attitude to our presence and activity in the
my position
coalition against ISIS
has always been that protecting Canadian security is one of the most important things that any government can do, and that's the lens through which we're looking at whatever they put forward. I have said from the very beginning, which is why we supported the sending of special ops troops to train and to assist, but not to accompany. We know, and I know, that Canada has a very important role to play amongst the community of nations in pushing back against ISIS. I had a bit of a disagreement over the Prime Minister on the best way to do that. I think Canada has a comparative advantage when it comes to humanitarian aid, when it comes to refugee support, even military missions that are more logistical or medical in nature. I think we have a capacity to help on the world stage in a way that would have been different than just airstrikes.
So, Conrad, what do you make of what he said?
Well, I don't quite agree with him. I mean, I agree with him as far as he went, but his aversion to Canada playing any actual military role, I don't agree with. Certainly, it is not for Canadians to get down on the ground and fight it out with local forces, and no one is suggesting that. Not Stephen Harper, not anyone else. But I think we can all agree that what we are dealing with here is a terribly barbarous, completely unacceptable group. I think it's overstating it to compare it to the Holocaust. That was perpetrated by the most powerful country in Europe deploying an immense military power, Nazi Germany. And they were aiming at the wholesale extermination of millions of people. This is a splinter group of fanatics, but qualitatively, it's
Getting
just as evil. It's
stronger,
just not getting stronger. ISIS
Well,
is not getting stronger.
the airstrikes, too, are pinpointed, and now we've seen a 75% decrease in their capacity to raise funds through the selling of oil. So
they don't have access to a pipeline. Even $1 million a day is 20,000 barrels, and with the U.S. Air Force overhead, it's hard to move 20,000 barrels of oil. Look, they're evil, awful people, but Canada has to do its role. But essentially, local forces have to do the fighting.
Let's see the perspective from another politician, because we also have a clip from NDP MP Paul Dewar addressing the Syrian refugees' ability to come to Canada. So let's take a listen.
Mr. Speaker, Canada committed to taking in 1,300 Syrian refugees by the end of 2014. But only 457 Syrian refugees have landed in Canada. The minister failed to deliver on his commitment and repeatedly misled Canadians and this House. These are not just numbers, Mr. Speaker. They're actual human beings in the worst war zone in the world, left behind by this minister. How can he justify such a pathetic track record on behalf of those who are so vulnerable? Hear, 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 hear.
Right now, we're going to take a short break. Back in a moment.
No sane person likes war, an activity that has been made steadily more destructive by the advance of science. And the failure of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars to produce clearly desirable and durable results, despite the commitment there of over $2 trillion by the United States and scores of thousands of American and Allied casualties, has promoted a heightened aversion to military action. The United States itself has gravitated from a trigger-happy to an almost pacifist foreign policy. In these circumstances, it is tempting to imagine that the best course is to steer clear of all foreign conflicts and confine ourselves to the defense of our own shores and borders. But the overwhelming lesson of the last century has been that collective action by countries with a common interest to protect democracy and maintain peace requires us to identify our shared vital interests and to do the necessary to protect them before a mortal threat arrives at our own borders. The failure to do this in the 1930s caused the British Commonwealth to come under mortal threat and the United States to be attacked by a foreign power for the first time in its history. The containment strategy followed by the Western Alliance through the Cold War avoided war between the great powers and brought the peaceful disintegration of the Soviet communist threat. The lessons of these experiences must require the West to act together and steer between over-hasty recourse to war and an avoidance of the use of force that facilitates aggression against our vital interests. The West, including Canada, must give intelligent support to civilized forces and outcomes in the Middle East.
Well, before we go, let's go around and see what everybody here thinks the solution should be, or what we can do to help bring about a solution. Dalal?
Well, as the voice for the girls, many girls in Iraq right now and in Turkey and in Syria facing sexual violence and including rape and other forms of sexual violence. I want Canada to open their doors for these girls. They've already been through hell. They don't need any more. They need a life. They need a new beginning. There's no hope there. There's no services there. They're coming back from being raped 30 times a day to coming to nothing, to living in tents, to living in these helpless, it's unimaginable. Just imagine if it was your own daughter. If it was your own daughter, would you allow that to happen?
Well, very, very passionate plea that I'm sure people are listening to.
Well, we have to continue to play our role with our international partners, the goal of which is to drive ISIL out of the region to eventually eliminate this organization and allow people to return to their homes.
Ian, do you agree?
Yes. First principle war is to select and maintain the aim. And we know that the aim is the elimination of ISIS. And Canadians military, the professional soldiers on the ground, the air crew that are participating, the logistics support, are doing their job extremely well to work with our allies to ensure that that job is accomplished.
Canada should look at the Kurdistan region. There's a fact. We have to look at the root cause of all this crisis happening in that part. There's a fact that the Muslims, there are two ethnic groups that they cannot live together at all, which is Sunnis and Shia. All these wars started because of this ethnicity, and then it affects the Yazidis, affect the Kurdish region in general. So the Canada and international world should look at the independence of Kurdistan.
I think there's more than one solution. There are, military and political solutions that are needed, but that's got to be accompanied with a robust humanitarian effort that is rooted in long-term solution that engages people. And that's what we're hoping to do at ERDO in partnership with One Free World.
Okay.
We invite anybody to come join us.
Great. Conrad, we'll give you the last word.
I agree with those who've said that the first requirement is the military annihilation of ISIS. We can't negotiate with them. We can't do anything. We have got to destroy them militarily. I certainly agree with David that then the humanitarian effort should be able to proceed more easily. But a solution would require, one, assuring that Iran does not become a nuclear power. Two, disincentivizing Turkey from continuing to play footsie with and incite extreme elements. And three, having the Arab powers. And the Saudis and Egyptians have behaved with magnificent responsibility in all these issues. We have to get them to lean on the Palestinians to change the right of return to an independent Palestine and not to try and inundate Israel with Arabs. And if you can get those elements, then you will have confederal arrangements in what are now Iraq and Syria, where you get an autonomous Nineveh and some of the other steps. But it's got to be one step after another, and it is not going to be like falling off a log.
It sounds
get involved. I think it's going to be
good ideas.
It's going to be safe and stabilized if they do, because both sides are fighting for that.
We can't just ask the Americans to do it.
Well,
the UN.
I think these are excellent.
Don't rely on the UN for anything. Right.
I think these are excellent ideas, but maybe in reality a little bit tough to execute. So lots for us to think about. In the meantime, thanks to Majid Al-Shafi for today's footage. You can learn more about his aid missions at onefreeworldinternational.org. And thank you for being with us. We'll see you again. theZoomer airs here Mondays at 9 Eastern Time on Vision TV. It's time to zoom out.